Welcome to Two Guys, Three Crowns, the podcast that talks about what it's really like to live in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm Sean, and with my fellow American Rodney, we break down the good, the bad, and the just plain weird. It's quite the journey, so join us for the ride. Rosenberg's H-bombs, Sugar Ray, Panmunjom, Brando, the King and I, and the Catcher in the Rye, Eisenhower vaccine, England's got a new queen, Marciano, Liberace, Satayana, goodbye. We didn't start the fire, it was always burning since the world's been turning.
Wow, Sean.
Dude, I will not lie, I had to look up the lyrics for that one because I'm like, no one knows that thing by heart.
Hey, looking up the lyrics is one thing. Remembering them, that's the hard part. Hey, Sean, we got a historic episode today.
Exactly. That's why I went for a song that recounts history.
Ah,
yeah,
yes.
We got a themology going on.
Ooh, you are a themologist. We are fortunate and very pleased to have today with us two special guests. We have Chris and Åsa. And they have a podcast called A Flatback History of Sweden.
Which is probably one of the greatest podcast names I've heard of.
Ever heard. Chris, Åsa, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Chris should have all the credit for the name. You came up with this little IKEA pun for the title.
Yes. It was, I think a few people, mainly Swedes, have said, This is a pun on IKEA. They had to sort of check.
I actually, when I came across it the first time, I had to check with Sean because I said, "Hey, there's a podcast and it's a flat pack something."
Yeah, I'm like, that's a British thing for IKEA. It's an interchangeable phrase there.
Okay. So you have this this wonderful podcast, but let's start. Let's go ahead and rewind it a little bit and start with you guys being here. Now, Åsa, you were here from the beginning.
Yeah. The name gives it away. I was born here.
Now, Chris, tell us, how does the story pre-pod?
Yeah, how did you two connect? How did the podcast come to be?
Well, so we met in London a little over 3 years ago, and we're a couple in real life and on the podcast, so that's important to know. Yes. So we met well before there was an idea for a podcast, and I've listened to podcasts on everything for years, but especially history podcasts, and we thought, there must be a decent podcast on Swedish history in English, and we found there wasn't one, so we said, we might as well make it ourselves.
Yeah, I work in content production mainly of TV, but I've also worked in radio production and newspaper journalism, and I was constantly complaining to Chris how I never get to do any of my own ideas. I have 10 million bosses above me at various production companies and broadcasters and whatnot, and I'm the lowest one down, and I just produce whatever other people tell me to do. And so Chris was like, well, let's start a podcast, and you only have me to talk to. So
and you kind of laughed at that a little bit, and you were like, you, yes. Oh, yeah, it's fantastic. And I think that's actually fairly common. I think that's very common. A lot of us that have podcasts have interests that maybe we don't necessarily work with every day, have a passion for, or have this urge to do, and yes, occasionally have we work under people that might not give us the chance to go ahead and do those things that we really want to do. We either start businesses or we start podcasts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, tell us a little bit. Well, tell us more about the podcast, the way that you decided to go ahead and set it up, and how it's running.
Yeah, so the idea is to go from the very beginning of Swedish history all the way up to today, 2021. And by the time we get to the present day, it won't be 2021 because
Right.
it's going to take forever.
Yeah.
Probably more like 2030. So we started with the Stone Age Swedes, and we
My God.
sort of try and go into as much depth about the period that we're in without it becoming, its own PhD. So it's sort of
Right.
between half an hour episode as we go throughout the history. And we wanted to do something because there's so many podcasts about that for other countries.
Sure.
A lot of them are sort of very historical focused, but we thought with me now getting okay Swedish and also obviously being Swedish, we wanted to have something a little extra fun at the start of episodes. So we
Sure.
thought we would have, so we do a Swedish phrase of the week where we translate Swedish phrase into English and talk about what that might mean, what it might be confused with, and how it started. And yeah, that's been one of the most fun parts.
Yeah, and so we
Yeah.
release an episode every other Sunday, and it's, like we said, a chronological journey. So we're now up to the late 1100s, early 1200s, so Middle Ages.
But
Right.
now it's going to slow down because now there's so much more information.
There's
Each
civilization all
year
of a sudden.
almost we could do an episode on, whereas the first episode I think we covered 5,000 or 6,000 years in half an
Is that
hour.
right? Right. They moved this rock from here to over here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That and you occasionally. Today, I had to take a spin into the city from Ninas up to the city and back, and I went ahead and listened to the episode that you did about bomb shelters in Stockholm. So you also have these little unique episodes as well.
Yeah, occasionally we've done special episodes, especially since we moved here, because when we started the podcast, we lived in London. But since we moved here, you do find that history is all around us. That sounds like a cliche, but it really is. And so the special episode about bomb shelter that you listened to, well, that came about because we moved into this block of flats or
Right.
apartment building. And it's from the 1950s, and all houses in Sweden from that period were built with a bomb shelter because,
Right.
the Cold War was very much a reality. It wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when for
Right.
Sweden then. And so,
And that's totally different from anything in the UK. And so that's the thing with with all the guests you had on your podcast, talking to them
Right.
about what strikes you when you move to Sweden in the first weeks and months. And
Yeah.
ours was, why do we have a bomb shelter next to the
Yeah, it's funny because I remember my high school had the signs like down by like the locker, the weightlifting room for all the sports teams. That's how you would get into the tunnel for the bomb shelter because it was built in the same kind of an era, like the 50s and all that. But the one thing we didn't have was this giant horn every first Monday going, "Wah, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming."
Right. Yeah. Hesa Fredrik. No.
Exactly. I had kind of, because growing up here, it's just, it's a fact of life, you
Right.
never question it. And then we moved back here, and I was like, yeah, it is kind of weird that we have this like air raid siren that goes
Right.
off. But it must be terrifying. I don't know if any of the listeners to this podcast might have heard it the first time and not known what it was, and really like, oh my God, I'm in a World War II movie. What's happening?
I don't think that's on any of the Stockholm brochures or when you're visiting Sweden. It's
I
like,
can tell you, I forget every time, and then it happens. I'm like, "What's going on? What's going on?"
Well, also you tested for the first time.
Yeah.
I texted. I was at work and I said, "Oh, look, the siren, quick!" And she's like, also said, "Oh, I'm running to the basement," and timed it and said, "I can get here in 36 seconds."
Hopefully I'd be safe.
Yeah. The only problem, well, I don't know if it still is, but I remember in the episode you said that that there had to be 2 exits, right, to that room, and you had found one, but you weren't sure if the other one was behind that locked door. And I was sitting there going, yeah, I don't know. How much of a rush would you be to getting into a room? It's like, okay, one way in, one way out.
Yeah, and fight the way through all the bikes in our case.
Yeah. Now, did you come directly, or you were living down in?
We
You
were
were
in
living
London.
down.
Yeah, I'm from the south coast of the UK, but
Okay.
we so I went to Nottingham for university. Then I moved. I lived abroad in Malta for a year and a half, which was as different to Sweden in pretty much every way possible. The
I was going to say
the coldest it's ever been in Malta is +2 degrees.
yeah. Yeah, I was going to say that's not really your preparation.
Yeah, sounds like my
for
kind of
Swedish.
place.
Right.
Yeah, and then we met in London, and then we moved around moved in together in London, and then moved straight here from there. So,
But did you move to Stockholm, or were you guys down in Skåne?
So
First.
moving during a pandemic, it was a bit tricky. So I did go. I'm from Skåne,
Right.
as all the listeners of our podcast will notice. When I ever say anything in Swedish, I have a thick, pronounce it with a thick Skånska accent. So I went briefly down to see my family, but also to stay with them. But we always knew we were going to settle in Stockholm because Chris had his job here already by the time we moved.
but when we were actually looking, we said we would be happy to go anywhere. We just said, okay, because for me, we had to move before the end of this last year because of Brexit. And so we said, okay, well, we decided pandemic, living in a small 1-bedroom flat in London, we could get everything is so much bigger and cheaper and more affordable in Sweden, even in Stockholm. And so we thought, okay, let's just decide September, October, we're moving to Sweden. Ended up being to Stockholm, but we were happy going to Kiruna or Malmö. So
Right. Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's quite the move. And the move during the pandemic, and then you brought up Brexit. It's like, okay, we could do like thousands of episodes just on those couple of.
I mean, if you guys ever move again, it's going to be like, doesn't this feel a little too easy?
Moving during a pandemic
inside of Stockholm. So okay, so we just need half a day off work to put stuff in a van and change our subscriptions to a new address or something.
And now when did you guys got here in October? You said October.
Also September, me October.
Okay. And how has that been as far as being out and about in Stockholm as much as possible, of course, now?
Yeah, well, we've had no real opportunity to do anything sort of inside. There's podcast related. There's loads of great museums and palaces and all that kind of thing that we'd love to go and see that we've just seen from the outside. I think we went to a pub or a bar in October, November once with some friends, and that was kind of it really that we've done on that sort of thing. But it's been great because one of the reasons for us moving was to move. We live on Lidingö. And I'm 25 minutes door to door to my job in central Stockholm, but we're living on an island right by the sea and the forest, which is one of the main draws that we had from moving from the UK and semi-central London. It's just a whole other world.
When the snow came, we bought a pulka, a sled, and we started doing all of that. I do think this is the most outdoorsy I've been in, forever. Just been really nice. But then I feel bad because my whole family was excited about me moving back to Sweden after 10 years abroad, and we're going to see each other more. And then, they live down in Skåne. We haven't been down once. We didn't spend Christmas with them. We haven't done anything. They haven't been able to come up because of the pandemic. So we're technically in the same country, but we never
kind of a little bittersweet. It's like, I'm home. I have 2 Swedish cousins, and I think I saw them more when I was growing up and coming here during the summer. Well, I know for a fact that I saw them more then because I you go out of your way to go ahead and book those those opportunities to see somebody. In 15 years, I think handful of times. But that is Skåne now. But you've been down there, Chris.
Yeah, I actually came to. Was one of the fun things that why me and Åsa met was we met on one of these, not Tinder, but sort of like a dating app thing. And I'd actually been to Lund twice. I had a friend. I met a Swedish friend who was over in the UK one summer, and I went to visit her twice in Lund. And so I sent the first message. I knew that also had on her profile thing that she was Swedish, and so I said,
Right.
"Oh, that's amazing. I've been to Lund twice,"
Lund.
and then also said, "Oh, I was actually born in Lund."
Yeah, that's actually my hometown. So I think that was like when I got that message, I was actually, and my flatmate or roommate at the time can confirm this, that I had said that I was going to quit this dating app because I was over like quite sucky first dates with
Right.
loads of people.
Yeah.
Not loads of people, but yeah.
Close
but
your
it was
ears.
good.
Close your ears.
I hadn't been enjoying it, and I said I was going to quit
Right.
the app, and then a message pops up, from this guy who said he's been to Lund, and I
Lund
like,
twice.
have to at least go and see him once.
This is also was like in the middle of texting back and be like, hey, you know what? You've never been to Lund.
Yeah. When you said you got loads of messages like, "Oh, you're from Sweden. I've been to Oslo."
Exactly.
Yeah,
The cuckoo clocks. Switzerland has the best Alps.
exactly. I mean, you get all the cliches,
Right.
all the time. So yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, how fun! How fun is that? That is.
Yeah. And yeah, before we moved to Stockholm, I'd never been here. I came here for literally about 6 hours between for a job interview, and then went home back to the UK, and that was all I'd seen of Stockholm. The other time, I've been 5, 6, 7 times to Skåne, and once we went from Skåne up to my friend who lives in Oslo, and so we got to see all the west coast going up that way, but never over here to Stockholm.
Right. Fantastic. That's awesome. I like that.
At least you moved in October, though, so now you can like appreciate what we have coming to us in 2, 3, 4, or 5 months, something on the horizon. It keeps moving away, but yeah,
exactly. Midsummer in about 8 months, and that's like the best day of the year.
Assuming it doesn't rain.
Yes.
Yeah, were we in Skåne for a midsummer? I don't think we have. I haven't been in Sweden for a midsummer. We've had lots of kräftskiva and stuff like that back in our home in London.
Sure.
We had one of my best friends from university is actually Swedish speaker from Finland, so they have exactly the same traditions and everything. So we'd get together and speak Swedish and eat some shrimp and all that kind of stuff. So, but now it's going to be in Stockholm.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna woo. You get to experience the real deal. We've talked to a lot of expats that have. We always say that they've been kind of lured over here during the summer, where like their partner tells them, "Come over in June, come over in June and see how Sweden is," and they come in June and they're like, "Oh, this is fantastic! Yeah, we're moving. Yeah." But you're gonna love it.
Yeah, well, and actually, the snow and the cold is something that I love anyway, because I love biathlon or skidskytte in Sweden.
Oh, okay.
I've actually been to Norway, the Czech Republic, Finland, Slovakia to watch this crazy sport. So I love the cold. If it's minus 20, I love it.
Yeah.
So.
You're fine then.
Oh, you're going to be great here. You're going to, Chris.
Because I've lived in Latin America, and I love the heat, and I sort of love living close to the equator. I'm the one who complains when I get eczema on my hands when it's cold.
Yeah.
Just out enjoying the skiing.
Yeah. My mom left Sweden when she was 22 years old, and I think a lot of it probably had to do with like the temperature stuff. And she became a flight attendant, flew to all these exotic places. Now she's still in San Francisco, and we're like, "Come on over." She's like, "Nah, I don't know." I was like, "Mom, you're Swedish. You got to come over." She's like, "Nah, I don't think so."
San Francisco is a great city, though. I understand why your mother didn't want to leave.
Yeah, again, the temperature when we moved here, I had never driven in the snow or in the dark with snow. And so, I mean, for that type, for somebody to come from out of, an environment where you don't really experience a real winter and then come here, that's why you go to driving school. And that's why they have halkbanan. It's like, why not learn how to skid in a controlled environment?
Yeah, we would get snow, maybe like real snow back in the UK where I'm from, maybe once every 4 or 5 years. So I've driven in snow like that once, I think. maybe twice over a winter. So I haven't
Right.
I haven't done anything like that yet. So that will be something to tick off.
Well, you got so much fun stuff coming up, Chris. I envy you.
Now, since you guys are a Swedish history podcast, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to ask you guys, what is the craziest Swedish history story you've come across so far? And I know you're only up to the Middle Ages, but what if you had to pick out one gem, like evidence of Björn the Viking or something else, what would be like the piece de resistance so far?
Yeah, well, my favorite story is probably this guy called Ansgar, who was the first Christian missionary to come to Sweden. And he's actually sort of from Hamburg and Bremen, and he was the first guy here. And everything surrounding his trips, he was the first person to come. He went back to Hamburg and Bremen and came back again about 15 years later. This is all in the early 800s. And all the people he took with him, some of them got murdered. They were attacked by pirates and had all of their holy books stolen from them. He spent a year living in Birka, just near Stockholm, and tried to convert all of these people and didn't. And there were all these crazy stories written down because he had a biography written about him by his successor as the Archbishop of Bremen called The Life of Ansgar. And it has these amazing stories about how this one Christian person was left in Birka living after he went back to Hamburg, and all the pagans in Birka were trying to convince him to go back to being a pagan, and they said, nope, I'm going to pray. They all sat in a circle, and he said, okay, we're all going to sit in a circle, and it looks like it's going to rain in a bit. So if I pray to the Christian God and you all pray to the pagan gods, we'll see what happens when it rains. And then supposedly it rained and all the pagans got wet, and he was sitting there in a little bubble not being wet. And all these really crazy stories that for some reason this guy was so known about in his day that we luckily have this whole biography of him survives from over 1,200 years ago, and everything to do with his story and the people he met, and it's a blockbuster. It should be a film.
It's probably just a question of time.
Yeah.
So we did do an entire podcast episode just called The Life of Ansgar because, say the Vikings in Sweden at the time did not take kindly to the first Christians that came here. Christianity didn't go over very well. It took a couple hundred years before it sort of got firmly established.
Yeah, and we were talking about, because it's International Women's Day coming up.
Exactly.
It's in this Life of Ansgar story, he meets these. There's the story of these two women. One which also really likes about this. It's a widow, and she gets all the money. She's allowed to keep the money that her family had after her husband dies, and she is written in these sources about how she has all this money. And when she dies, she gives all the money to her daughter and tells her to go to a random church in Belgium to go and give the money to the poor in Belgium. So it shows you all about how this sort of presumably a woman our age, late 20s, has the agency and the ability to travel on her own, or at least buying passage with traders going all the way to Belgium and just hanging out in Belgium in the church there and distributing money to the poor. And it's how Ansgar's story gives you access to all these different amazing little stories that
holy smokes. Well, that one's definitely going to have to be that's on my reading list.
Yeah, listening.
Well, as the TV producer, you better secure the film rights already.
Yeah.
International Women's Day tomorrow, I believe, which is going to be today if you're listening. That's released. Well, so what kind of thing? Because we touched on that briefly when we spoke about the podcast. What's something that you can bring to light there? Because that's
if not so much maybe something we've covered in the podcast, but this year, 2021, is the centenary. It marks 100 years of female suffrage in Sweden.
Right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if, tomorrow or today, if you're listening, if you're picking up a newspaper, I wouldn't be surprised if there's articles on that, or I think there'll be a bit of a thing made around this very 1921 was a very important year for women in Sweden.
What are the chances that we'll see Swedish flags on buses tomorrow?
Ooh, I should have
Yeah.
contacted my contact at SL at least
Exactly.
to know if there'll be any flags. But well, so 16th of September 1921 was the first time Swedish women voted in a national election. So come September, we can all think about those first women that went to the ballot boxes.
And some were elected as well.
The first 5 women were elected into Parliament 100 years ago.
Wow.
Holy smokes.
Amazing.
And then I don't know if you guys have heard of it, how in 1922 there was the first real referendum in Sweden.
Okay.
We basically had a referendum of whether or not we were going to have prohibition, like in the States.
In the States, right.
Rusdrycksförbudet is the Swedish word for it. So
Okay.
that became the first referendum that women got to take part in.
Wow. And how did that, and that, is that where like the whole Systembolaget started?
Yeah.
People have been standing in line ever since? No.
For all of those who've struggled with the crazy laws around the sale of alcohol in Sweden, you can go back to 1921 and blame the people there.
Okay.
The referendum actually came to a no. They said, no, we're not going to have prohibition. But instead, we're going to have all these crazy laws around restriction of the sale of alcohol. But something I found very interesting, I find very interesting, is that whilst women had been given the right to vote the year before, and then there's this referendum, and men and women had different ballot papers. So you could tell what women voted for and what men voted for, obviously vastly different than today when it's all secret. And the reason was that basically if it was women who cast the deciding vote, they had said, well, we're not going to count it then. So women were allowed to, but if it came down to it and it was female votes, quote unquote, that had made the decision, then it was all these men in government were like, no. You're going to be the ones telling us whether we can drink or not. Like, yeah, you might be allowed to participate, but you're not going to count.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Imagine someone from Sweden, like anyone from Sweden now, time traveling back to that like craziness. Like, excuse me? Oh my God.
Are there, now we typically ask different favorites. What's your favorite this? What's your favorite that? And one of a little twist to that I wanted to ask you is a favorite historical figure. Now we just got, Chris had mentioned, but what would be your favorite historical figures? And you can cheat. You can think of historical figures that haven't popped up in the podcast yet.
Okay.
But do you have a couple of special?
Yeah, well, I'll let Åsa think first because I know mine. Mine is a guy called Carl Gustaf Rensköld, who was a field marshal under Karl XII or Charles XII, and he had this crazy life. He started as just a regular soldier in the Lifeguards and fought in the Skåne War and all throughout the Great Northern War, and he was actually a prisoner of war. He was captured just after the Battle of Poltava, was a prisoner of war in Russia for, I think, nearly over a decade.
Wow.
And he came back, he just made it back to Sweden and went to Norway, and he met up with Charles XII the day before Charles XII was killed. And he was his like right-hand man for decades, and then only finally met him after being a prisoner of war for 10 years. And then the king was killed the next day. And then he's the only non-religious or royal person to crown a king, because after Karl XII was king, he had all the power as being this leading political and military figure. And so at the coronation of the next king, he helped the archbishop put the crown on the next king, and he had this crazy life.
Holy smokes. Åsa, din favorit?
Min favorit, well, there are so many, but I will pick a fellow Skåning, someone from Malmö, Prime Minister Per Albin Hansson. So he was Prime Minister 1932 to 46, so during World War II, and became this very, he's known as Landsfader, this father of the land, Churchillian type person during the Second World War. A lot of the decisions that kept Sweden out of the war came down to him and his closest allies. So much of what we associate with the Swedish welfare state, the folkhemmet, is his political wing. But so very interesting political figure, but he also had a crazy personal life, which when I look at it, I just go like, wow, man, how did you have time? So he is prime minister. World War II is going on. He leads a double life where he's essentially married to two women. He has two separate families that know of each other, and they've agreed that, yeah, we can live like this. So he has one wife and kids, and another wife and kids. But then he also has a mistress.
My God.
World War II, like he drinks and smokes every day, and I'm like, geez, I think my life is pretty good.
Seriously.
God, Per Albin, you just like had a lot on your plate. Then he had a heart attack and died.
Well, no wonder, but wow. Yeah, he was a politician. I mean, that...
Jeez. Now, while we have some colorful historical figures, we've got some amazing places to go visit. And while I know you guys are still new to Stockholm still, but I know you haven't had the chance to go into any of the museums yet, but is there anything on the top of your list as soon as the restrictions come down for the most interesting piece of history in Stockholm, not named Vasa?
Well, we're going to get one of Åsa's nieces to come up and go on a tour of the palace with her, because she's really interested in all that sort of thing, and that would be really cool. I used to live I used to work even right. I could see Buckingham Palace from our office window in my job in London, so I'm really interested in all of that kind of stuff. So definitely something to do with the palace and the church, which is right next to the palace. So all that kind of stuff is really good that we've seen from the outside, but would be good to go inside.
And Sean doesn't mean you can't go and see Vasa if you want to go see it. You can still go to...
everyone always says Vasa, so we need a little something different, right?
I'm a little down on Vasa. Like, I think there's a lot of hoo-ha about the Vasa ship. I mean, the thing sank.
Exactly. Exactly. We could have built a museum around something that stayed afloat.
Yeah.
Successful.
Oh, I love it.
Now, we would love to meet you in person, because we have been in touch, and we will go ahead and put up links so that people can if they can't find Flatpack of history in Sweden on their own, that we will go ahead and help them along with a link in there. But thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a pleasure to have you, and we can't wait to meet you in person, especially since you're up in here in Stockholm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, it's one of those things that we feel so close yet so far away because of the restrictions and everything. So yeah, we're massively looking forward to being able to do stuff like that, and of course meet you guys.
Thank you guys so much for having us on. You do a great job with this podcast.
Well, thank you very much. And we'll have to see if we can't have another historic episode down the road.
Yeah, sounds perfect.
Tack så mycket.
Tack själv.
Tack.
That is it for this week's episode, everybody. A very special thank you to Flatpack History for stopping by. Be sure to check them out where you get your podcast from, probably where you are right now listening to this. They have some great stories about Sweden, and it's an amazing way to get to know the history of the country. And then come back here next week for more 2 Guys, 3 Crowns.